Hello, everybody. Welcome to another installment of A Rebel Without Applause, coming to you from my little nutshell of infinite space right here in the beautiful Beechwood Canyon. With me today is a special guest. He is a full-blooded native of LaLa land, a graduate of Theodore Roosevelt High School, East LA College, and UCLA, and he has just about touched every base imaginable in public service. First, and in many ways most importantly, as a union organizer and an advocate for public employees. He later went on to the California State Assembly, where he rose to the speakership. He then became a member of the LA City Council. He was elected mayor, the first Hispanic in over 130 years to serve as mayor. He knows what it's like to take a punch and come back swinging. He did that when he lost first for mayor in his first try. And similarly, he's running again for governor of California, which is, at last count, the fifth largest economy in the world. Bienvenido, Speaker, Mayor, and once again, candidate for governor, Antonio Villaraigosa.
Hola, amigo. How are you?
I'm good.
It's great to be on your show. You forgot to mention a couple of things. I actually started out as a activist on high school and college campus. I was a civil rights leader, president of the ACLU. Before I even got, and then a labor leader before I even got elected to the state assembly, where I was majority whip, majority leader, speaker, and as you said, a council, well, you didn't say a council member and mayor of Los Angeles. Right. And in addition, Bill, just before this show, you told me you live in Beechwood Canyon, where I used to live. I lived on Creston. So we were neighbors all this time. Great to be on with you. And finally, you were, your family still owns KWKW, KW.
Yes.
Hablamos en español.
Es posible. Jaime Harin is like an uncle to me, you know. I know him, and there wasn't a birthday party where this Jewish family didn't have mariachis, you know, because we could get them. So I'm really happy to have you. I really appreciate the time. You know, the first question I have for you is, we're sitting here in the rubble of a really spectacular Democratic Party defeat, and we're paying the price for it. It seems like it every day. You know, as you look back on November and last year, is there any takeaway that you can share moving forward?
Well, it is a monumental defeat. We lost to a convicted felon.
Yes.
Who was impeached twice, a man who is more divisive than any president that I could remember, certainly in modern times. Someone who smoked, I said sold rather. I said smoke. I was thinking smoking something when you hear him talk about tariffs, which are taxes, by the way. People have to understand that. Tariffs are taxes. But you know what I've also said? Some of this defeat falls on our shoulders. You know, we've always been a party of unions and have said that we're a party of working people, but we forgot a lot of the working people. I've said things like, our party thinks that people who don't have a college education are stupid, and they're not stupid. They care about the threat to our democracy like the rest of us. They care about a whole lot of things that most of us think about and care about. But they also care about a cost of living. You said it. We're now the fourth largest economy in the world. But I said 6 years ago, and I say it again, with the highest effective poverty rate. What does that mean? That means that even though they might get paid more than the federal minimum and then many other states, the cost of living also is higher. In fact, the cost of gas is the highest in the United States of America. The cost of utilities is the second highest. As I understand it, the average price of a home is the second highest in the country. And I don't think we were listening to those kitchen table issues in the way that we needed to. When people are struggling every single day, what happens in DC seems far, far away. When people see that, for instance, in the cities of California, that they're dirtier than we've ever seen them. When you see homelessness feeling like it's out of control, and when you don't feel safe in your neighborhoods, you ask the question, is government working for me? And so, although you and I believe strongly that it was not only a monumental election or defeat, but in so many ways, this is a defeat that I believe you have to put part of it on the doorsteps of the Democratic Party and Democratic leaders. Now, having said that, I do believe we need to challenge Donald Trump, particularly where what he is doing is disproportionately impacting Californians. The tariffs is one area. His attack on the Department of Education is another area, because as you know, Department of Education focuses a lot on the left behind, the communities where our public schools haven't worked in quite the same way as they've worked in other places, the disabled community as well. So there are a lot of things we need to be concerned about. But as I'm running for governor, I'm focusing a lot on what's broken here. I don't think it's enough to say, I didn't vote for Donald Trump. I don't believe he is doing a good job. I think we need to focus a lot more on improving the quality of life for people who live here.
Beyond lawsuits, what is in the governor's toolbox that maybe Gavin isn't using to really play a more effective defense to protect our schools, our neighborhoods, our environment, our habeas corpus provisions in the Constitution? I mean, everything feels like it's under assault. I would just say this. These fatwas or executive orders are very flimsy instruments. Most of these things really should take acts of Congress. Okay, you won the election. Make your case, pass the laws. That's the system, not just writing orders like like you own a 7-Eleven. I'm just curious, your governor, what's in your toolbox?
Well, first of all, I don't think we can diminish the importance of using the courts. Our courts are under assault.
Mm-hmm.
Our democratic institutions, freedom of the press, the First Amendment is under assault when you see the attacks on the press, limiting the national press who can come to the White House to friends and sycophants, people who just extol the virtues of this president and don't challenge him where challenging is appropriate. So I do think the lawsuits is important. I think that's the primary way to take on President Trump. So I commend the governor and the legislature for allocating those dollars to do that. Bill, I'm of the school that other than the bully pulpit, we need to focus a lot more on what's not working here,
Mm-hmm.
California. The Congress, the Senate, the House have a responsibility to challenge executive power when it overreaches, when it doesn't observe and obey Supreme Court rulings, when it criticizes the federal judiciary when they challenge the constitutionality of much of what he's doing. I think the governor needs to focus a lot more on making sure that we're not only the fourth largest economy in the world, but that the economy is working for everyone, that the economy is working for the people who it hasn't always worked for. Let me give you an example. There are people that today in the city of Los Angeles who travel 2 hours to work.
Yes.
The cost of gas is important to them. They often work two jobs. Those people have been chronicled in the newspaper record in the LA Times. They're working every single day. They're doing what you're supposed to do as, a full-fledged participant in our economy and our society. And it's not working for them. And so we need to address the cost of gas, the cost of groceries, the cost of energy, because they're struggling. Many of them bought into the snake oil that President Trump was selling. The promises he was making that really aren't going to come true, but all they're looking at right now is survival. I
Right.
think people in the middle class are looking for relief as well. It's not just the working poor. There are a lot of people here in the city of Los Angeles, in the state, who feel like government isn't working for them, who are looking for competence in our government, who want government to address the housing crisis, where we have, as I said, the second highest housing prices, rents that, frankly, are unaffordable to most people.
Right.
You and I are homeowners. It used to be that homeownership was part of the American dream. Now, for too many Californians, renting an apartment with three roommates is the reality. And our kids can't buy a home without our help.
We both went to public high schools. I went to Taft in the Valley when in the 70s, and I can recall driving or riding my bike to school and knowing where the teachers lived in the neighborhood. That ship has sailed. You can't work at a public high school and live in that neighborhood anymore unless you inherited it. People who service the homes that burnt down sadly in the Palisades, they can't live there. It's impossible.
They can't live there. They lost work because of the devastating fires in the Palisades and in the Altadena area. And there's no question that people are asking and saying to governmental leaders, whether they're Democrat or Republican, we want our federal government to work. We want them to observe the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. We want our state and local governments and our school districts to work too. There's a lot of talk about Doge, and I think we're all highly critical of the notion that you eliminate fraud and find efficiencies and get more accountability with a chainsaw, because that's what they did.
Yeah.
Without any evaluation, not even a temporary 30-minute evaluation, they came in cutting. That's not what we need to do. On the other hand, I think people do want our government to work. I think they're asking the question, for instance, Bill, we've spent tens of billions on homelessness. Where's the money gone? Is it working? And if it's not working, what are we doing to correct it, to make it work? Those are legitimate questions that don't have a D or an R in front of them. They're questions we all ought to have. I told you I was living pretty close to you, almost a next door neighbor.
Yes.
And I lost money on my house because, there was so many homeless at the bottom of the hill on Gower, where you and I used to go up, and you still go up to your home.
Yeah.
And people said, I don't want to live there, even though there were no homeless at the top of the hill where I lived. And so I think we do have a responsibility right now to do our part. We can focus on Trump, and we should, particularly through legal means, through the courts. But I think we also need to challenge what's broken here, and take responsibility in a blue state for the fact that whatever's broken here is broken in no small part because we weren't watching the store. We weren't doing the things we had to do it to address the concerns that people have in the state.
I would say this, growing up in LA, I do remember playing baseball and football at Taft High School. So many of the practices were canceled because of smog alerts.
Yes.
You could not breathe. Like, oh, it hurts. I can't recall the last smog alerts. And there was something called the Air Quality Management District. And with government intervention, things got better. I'm a surfer. There used to be a lot of those places you don't want to get out there because it's toxic. But there was something called the Clean Water Act and Hyperion sewage and treatment, and things got better. And also, too, just down Gower, our current mayor has made a high priority. It's not a city right now, a tent city. It's actually better, but it changes every day. You never really know. My point is, it's not just a one-way street towards things always getting worse. Things can indeed get better. You would know that starting with your work with Cesar Chavez and Dolores.
At 15 years old, I was involved in the farm worker boycott. At 15 years old, I helped start the Black Student Union and then the United Mexican American Students. I led the walkouts at my high school back then. I've been involved my whole life. I was inspired by the civil rights movement, the movement to make our founding fathers edict that all men are created equal, to include women, and to include more than just Europeans who own property, by the way, who
Right.
own property. So if you didn't own property, you weren't included in that part of our Constitution. If you
Right.
were Black, you weren't included. You were three-fifths of a human being. If you were Native American, the same thing. And so there's no question in my mind that we have made progress because of the Civil Rights Act and the civil liberties that we enjoy, the Bill of Rights. We have made progress in cleaning up our air. You know, when I was in the legislature, I authored the Carl Moyer Act. Carl Moyer Act worked with truckers and people with heavy duty machinery, helped them retrofit by providing grants that they had to match to retrofit their engines. We knew that you couldn't just require them to do that at an astronomical cost for individual truckers and farmers and people using that heavy duty machinery. But we knew if we worked with them, we could help to solve and improve the quality of air. Because I do remember those days as well, Bill. That's why I said, by the way, I had a 100% record, according to the California League Conservation Voters on the environment. When I was mayor, I said, dream with me. We'd make LA one of the cleanest, greenest big cities in America. We signed on to the Kyoto agreements, which said reduce carbon emissions at 7% of 1990 levels by 2012. We did 28%. The port, which is one of the biggest emitter of emissions in Southern California, we made it the greenest port, not in the United States, in the world, Bill. I've always supported the AQMD, but I've also said that as we move, by the way, we use the same amount of water that we did in 1970 when we had 1 million less people. So I was, 144,000 street lamps are LED. All of our traffic signals are LED. We synchronized our traffic signals, which only really works at night because we have so much in the way of traffic and gridlock. We built more light rail than anybody in America and infrastructure. And so be clear, this fight for the environment has caused some improvements, and we should revel in that. But we need to tread carefully, and I'll tell you why. We have a mandate for all electric cars by 2035. That seems legitimate, right? We want to get rid of those gas, noxious fume that are emitted from our cars. But what if I told you we built about 167,000 charging stations in 10 years, mostly in affluent areas, Bill? The Democrats, remember? Supposed to be, so mostly in affluent areas. We need 2 million in the next 10 years. And even if we built that 2 million, we haven't been building transmission lines. So we wouldn't have the grid for that edict. So what are we doing? We're saying to people, let's get rid of our refineries. We're thousands of union jobs, refineries on the West Coast. Last time I looked, is the national security issue. They produce the cleanest fuel in the nation with the highest gas prices. 5 days after we lost an election where people said that the cost of gas and groceries was high on their mind and why they voted for Donald Trump, we move in this state to make the fuel cleaner still. And SC says it could cost up to $1.25 to $1.50 a gallon more. So 6 years ago, I said the following, and I continue to say it today. We can't be a party of just people that drive a Tesla and not a Toyota pickup or a Ford 250 or ride a bus like my mother did. We have to move aggressively on climate change, on climate action, so that we don't do edicts like the AQMD is doing now, where it says get rid of your gas stove, your grass water heater. And when we do that, maybe you can afford that, but a lot of people can't. So we have to have a balance. Clean our air, but not put all of the burden on the little guy. When I was mayor, we did Green LA. We did efforts to lower utility costs. Our utility costs in the last 6 years have gone up 66%. You know what your utility bill looks like?
I don't want to look at it, but yeah, it's big.
I know what mine does.
Yeah.
It's between 1,100 and 1,300 every other month for water and power. Those are numbers that middle class can't afford and working people can't afford. So we have to engage in climate action, not climate talk and just set. We got to build transmission lines. We got to accelerate the R&D to build the storage power, the battery power for renewables. Because let me tell you this, we have excess solar in California. We can't use because we don't have the storage for it. So you know what we do? We sell it for nothing to Arizona in the summer and give it at 2 cents a kilowatt in the winter. We're giving it away because we're not building storage, because we're not taking climate action, because we don't have an all of the above strategy that says, yes, we're moving aggressively toward renewables the way I did. I went from 3% renewables in 8 years to 20%. But we're also going to use natural gas. We're also going to continue to use oil and gas for decades. So we can't close down refineries. And we got to try to keep the cost at a place where people continue to support these policies. So that's what we got to focus on. If we're focusing so much on just screaming at DC and the man in the White House and not focusing on these problems, I think we're missing the forest for the trees. And the one thing you said, I have to reintroduce myself. I want you to go back. When I was mayor of this town, it was a lot cleaner, a lot safer, and there was a fraction of the homeless that there is today. That didn't mean we didn't have problems. We had big problems, but I was rolling up my sleeve, crisscrossing every part of this town, working with people to solve those problems. That's what the next governor needs to do.
Problem solver, that's what you call yourself. And for me,
A proven problem solver, exactly.
Okay, PPS, proven problem solver. Now, what that means,
I call myself a proven problem solver, and there's a billionaire Democrat who's trying to stop me from doing that. I have a record, as you know, on climate change. Let me go through the record real quickly.
By all means.
I was Speaker of the California State Assembly, and we got 2 budgets with a surplus. We only had 42 and 48 votes, so we didn't have a supermajority. One year I had to work with Republican Pete Wilson, and the next year with Gray Davis. We passed the largest expansion of healthcare, responsible and sensible gun laws. We focused on the quality of life of people in California. Later, I became mayor, as you said. LA was one of the most violent big cities in America. We reduced that violence by 48%. Nearly a 50% drop in violent crime to 1950 levels with constitutional community policing, expanding after-school programs, growing our police officers by 1,000 officers, taking guns off the streets of California, summer youth jobs. We had an all-of-the-above approach on crime and criminal justice. 1 out of 3 schools were failing. You said you went to Taft. The San Fernando Valley was talking about seceding from LA's schools. Remember that?
Yes.
They're not talking about that anymore. By the time I left, it was a 60% increase in the graduation rate. Built more infrastructure and trains and public transit than anybody in the country, and anybody in an 8-year period of time in my city and state. And finally, #1 American city in reducing carbon emissions, #5 in the world. We were focused on work. So when I call myself a proven problem solver, I'm not just talking. I got a record. So you have a billionaire businessman who sues me in federal court and says, you can't use that term.
Read that.
Because I've used it when I announced my candidacy in July. We have a launch video that talks about proven problem solver. More importantly, a record that affirms and confirms that I've been a proven problem solver. And he's trying to stop me from doing that. And what I've said, Bill, I'm going to stand up for the Bill of Rights. I've always stood up for our Constitution. We have freedom of speech in this country. And I'm not going to let a bully push me around and stop me from saying what's just a commonly used slogan, by the way. I'm not the first person to call himself a problem solver. Probably been hundreds, maybe thousands of politicians who have done that. I think what distinguishes me from him is I actually have a record. And so we're in federal court. We'll be in federal court. He's filed that claim against me, and we're going to fight it, even if it means draining my account for governor, because I'm going to, as governor, stand up for the Bill of Rights, stand up for the Constitution, stand up against bullies who want to stop us from challenging the status quo and from pointing, in my case, pointing to a track record that's incontrovertible.
Well, to me, problem solver, first of all, when this guy sues you, it reminded me of the Pat Riley three-peat, where he coined that word and, claimed ownership of it. Anybody who used three-peat would be subject to, lawsuit. I always thought that was kind of silly. But when I read the article about this problem solver suit, I don't know, it just seemed kind of silly to me.
It's more than just silly, though. If we let bullies with unlimited cash stop us from speaking our mind, challenging the government, speaking truth to power, what kind of leaders are we? I think this is a perfect example of the kind of leader you'll see me. If you violate our Constitution, if you try to deny us our Bill of Rights, I'm going to speak up and I'm going to fight back.
We need that. And when you say problem solver, to me, that means not fantasy thinking. It means building bridges. It's easy to just say, well, I don't want to, it's off topic, but river to the sea, whether it's the Palestine or the Israelis, guess what? Nobody's going away. It's fantasy thinking, get real, make a deal. And I kind of feel like we don't have the luxury of being ideologues. We have to get real. We can't move to a utopia without oil. We can't get there. It's just not.
Exactly, Bill. And that's what I'm saying. I have a record as an environmentalist. I have a record of improving our schools, a record of taking on violent crime and making this city safer, a record across the board at solving our budget problems. If you remember, Bill, I was mayor of LA when Wall Street downgraded our municipal bond ratings and said we were going bankrupt. The newspapers regularly spoke about the prospect of bankruptcy. And I said, not under my watch. I said, I'm going to make the tough calls. And I did. Today we're looking in LA at $1 billion deficit, but the general fund is now at 7.5 billion or so. My general fund was 4.7 billion, and I had a $1.2 billion structural deficit. I had to make tough decisions, and I wasn't afraid to make those tough decisions. And I knew that it wouldn't be popular. It wasn't going to be popular to shake up a school district that, essentially said to me that, 1 out of 3 failing schools has a lot to do with the poverty we have. And there's no question that poverty plays a role. But we had a 60% increase because we didn't accept that. We said we can improve those schools. So you're right. My record as a proven problem solver is something that's incontrovertible. I'm going to defend it. But I'm not just defending my free speech. I'm defending yours, Bill. Your ability to get on this podcast and say what you want, what you believe is true, fact-based, of course, to challenge the government and some billionaire because he thinks he's got gobs of money and can, tie me and bully me from making the case that I got a record.
Well, my thing is, if you want to protect free speech, speak freely and also support journalism. subscribe to the New York Times and the Washington Post. And if there's a knock on my door in 30 seconds and says, hey, we got a one-way trip for you to El Salvador, come on.
We got to challenge that.
Yeah.
We got to challenge that. There's no question. But again, the place to challenge that, use the bully pulpit, but the real place to challenge it is in the courts.
Now, today I saw the LA Times before I, clicked on with you, and 100% tariff.
I was in the gym before I.
You look great. You look great. I swear, people say, Bill, how old are you? I go, I'm 69. You look great. Yep, for 69. For 45, I don't look so good, but that's another story. But 100% tariffs imposed. I just read this in the morning on, this is a term that doesn't really make sense, but foreign films. Now, I'm directed a movie and I've been an actor too. And it seems
and a comedian.
A comedian, yes. He's using a sledgehammer, which perhaps needs a scalpel. He's using sticks instead of carrots. We've got a big industry here that is in a free fall, in my view, Hollywood.
But let's be clear, Bill, and I'm not for his tariffs. It's just going to cause retaliation.
Right.
Yes, we often film in other countries. Let's incentivize people to film here. A lot of the runaway production that has occurred over the last 20 years or so, 25 years here in this city and in this state has nothing to do with the tariffs. And again, right. I'm opposed to tariffs because tariffs are taxes. It has everything to do with our unwillingness to support film, to support our actors. And more importantly, when I used to rock a red carpet and I'd get criticized by the newspaper of record about how often I walked a red carpet, this is what I would say, Bill. I'm walking this red carpet because the jobs behind the camera are more important than the people in front. That we had somewhere around 250,000 direct and indirect jobs related to film and TV and entertainment production in this city and in this state. We've lost more than a third of that. And we have because California has failed and LA have failed, particularly California, because they're the ones that give credits to compete with the other states. So yes, we've lost production out to countries outside of the United States, but a lot of the production we've lost has gone to New York, has gone to Georgia, has gone to Louisiana, has gone to
New Mexico,
and now more and more New Jersey. So we've got to address that. Yes, it's gone to Canada, it's gone to Britain and Europe. But I'll tell you something, it's not enough to point at Trump and the tariffs. And I did this morning. Our port, the largest port complex in the United States, LA Long Beach, is missing a whole lot of ships.
Yeah.
And they are because these tariffs are going to kill us, our economy. Tariffs are taxes, as I said earlier. And be clear, nobody gets hurt more than California. So I'm going to speak up on tariffs. But a lot of our runaway production has nothing to do with Donald Trump. It has everything to do with failed leadership in Sacramento to address this crisis. And by the way, let's be clear, they're moving from 350 million to 750. Just to give you some context, Georgia has a $1.5 billion credit. I believe that California needs to have a credit to compete. And if it means more than Georgia, so be it. People that live in Sherman Oaks and Studio City and Tarzana and in the San Fernando Valley, here on the west side, all over this town, rely on film. And I'm going to fight for them. No one, like someone who comes from LA, will take this fight as seriously as I will, because I've been fighting for Hollywood my entire public life.
I'll tell you a quick story. A girlfriend of years ago was a Pilates instructor. She worked at a chiropractic's office, and about 80% of her business that came through the chiropractic was people from Motion Picture Health. In other words, those were benefits that they used for rehabilitation. That's gone. That in other words, it's not just the people behind the cameras or in front of the cameras. It's people in the larger community that serves those
caterers, the production people. Yeah, it's all of that. And remember this, That's why I said direct and indirect jobs. It's a whole lot of people that support that industry. And as governor, I'm going to bring it back.
Quick thought, I've been down to San Pedro and Cabrillo Beach trying to learn a wing foil sport. And I urge people to go to that port and see the container ships backed up from Asia, the cranes. You want to make crane the state bird. I appreciate that comment.
Like I did for LA.
Right.
I made the crane the official bird of Los Angeles,
right.
And we're going to build again. If you haven't read the book Abundance, Democrats need to build. We need to build transmission lines. We need to build roads and highways. We need to build the infrastructure we need to support our economic might. We need to build the housing we need.
Right.
I think you're right.
The ships, the trucks, the rail links, this huge port, and I'm sure it's the same in Alameda, but there is nothing like the Long Beach, LA harbor, the amount of stuff, the economic engine that really is trade. It's Bodie, California now. It's ghost town, and it's.
I was there on Friday, Bill. There were no ships.
Right.
Maybe a couple, but where I was filming, there were virtually no ships. You're right. I know what an engine for the Southern California economy, the LA Long Beach complex is. But, the Oakland port is important.
Right.
San Diego port is important. Port Hueneme. These are all important ports. We move trade from Asia. And yes, we need a level playing field, but just willy-nilly picking a number, in this case 145%, doesn't make sense because tariffs are taxes, Bill. And by the way, our port complex creates jobs in all 435 congressional districts. That's how important it is to the U.S. economy, to the Southern California economy, and to the California economy. And we need a governor that understands that. Historically, the only people really that care about the LA Long Beach port are the people representing the general area. Everybody else really doesn't realize the impact of these ports to move our ag goods, to move all of the things we export and import. And so I understand it. And on that issue, I've made it clear I will challenge those tariffs because those tariffs are disproportionately hitting Angelenos, the Southern California region, and California overall.
Yeah, I mean it's a Trump import tax. That's what I would call it. I mean I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but taxes and taxation typically falls under the purview of the House of Representatives. And I didn't really understand that a tariff could be imposed unilaterally from the executive, but it doesn't feel right because it is indeed a tax and we're all paying for it.
Well, look, Trump isn't the first president to have tariffs. Let's be clear about that. But the size of those tariffs, the failure to negotiate before you impose those tariffs, the tariffs on our neighbors and our allies, those are things that have to cause all of us alarm and concern.
Right. It seems to me that it's more based on some misguided idea of revenge than any like attempt to fine tune our economy and protect labor and help struggling industries. Antonio, we could do this forever. There's so much to talk about in this big state. We're down here in SoCal, but we got all those NoCal people up there who hate the Dodgers that you need to reach out to. I want to thank you for being here and sharing your thoughts and energy with little old me down here in Beechwood Canyon. I really appreciate it.
Well, you're my former neighbor. And, I think these podcasts are an opportunity to reach people that might not otherwise be tuning in. As you know, not enough people are reading our newspapers or even tuning on to the major news networks and cable news networks. And so podcasts are important. Radio is important to reach out to a broader cross section of people. And I want to thank you, Bill, for caring enough about your city, your state, and your country, to host people like this. Thanks.
Well, I appreciate it. And, perhaps Kamala missed some of those opportunities in her own campaign to reach out on the pod place.
I think and I do, you're being polite. Perhaps is not the word.
Yeah.
And, let's be clear, Bill. If you can't handle, when I do these podcasts, sometimes I'm going to get people that are very oppositional. They're going to disagree. That's debate. And, if you can't stand the heat, you shouldn't be in the kitchen.
And it sharpens your game, makes you better.
I'll tell you something. I've said this as well. Governor of California, the fifth largest economy in the world, a state with endless possibilities but enormous challenges, is not a stepping stone. This won't be a coronation because the revolution got rid of King George and kings and queens. And so we saw what a 100-day campaign looked like. And, I think the people of California are owed a debate, and we ought to be willing to engage in those conversations. So thank you so much. It's really good talking to you.
Yeah.
We'll see when we get together again soon.
Yeah, mucho gusto. Gracias para el tiempo and happy feliz Cinco de Mayo.
Feliz Cinco de Mayo.
Yeah, gracias. Hasta luego. Thank you so much.
Hermano.
I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Bye.